Welcome back to Celtics Are Here. I'm Josh McCafferty and it's another Champions League match day 5 in European football's premier club competition for Celtic. It's been a decent start for them so far this season. Next up, it's Club Brugge on Wednesday evening. To tell us a bit more about Brugge, the next opponents, it's Scott Coyne. How are you doing?
I'm good, Josh. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Just tell us a wee bit about yourself, your background and what you do.
Yeah, well, I'm part of the three-man team who produce the Belgian football podcast, which is a weekly podcast that covers all of the latest news across the Belgian football landscape. We try to do special episodes regularly throughout the season as well, where we get guests on from inside clubs to do a bit of a deeper dive into the culture and history of some of the clubs in Belgium. I also have my own freelance Belgian football consultancy where I do a little bit of work for players and clubs and agents in Belgium and in Europe as well. So if you're interested in Belgian football and English is your main language, then I'm probably worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, definitely check out all the Scott's channels, etc., which are clearly added there. First of all, Scott, what can you tell us about Club Brugge, their overall style of play, how they set up, and what they like to play against?
Yeah, well, I suppose, if you've not been following Belgian football closely, you will probably already know that Club are the kind of dominant side in Belgium at the moment and have been over the last few years. They've won 5 of the last 7 titles. In Belgium, couple of interludes in there. Antwerp won the double a couple of years ago, and Genk won a title as well. But yeah, Club have won 5 of the last 7, and are comfortably financially the strongest club in Belgium as well. And that's because of a combination of factors. Really consistent appearances in European football over that time has allowed them to rack up the financial benefits that come with that have kept them quite a bit ahead of their competitors in Belgium. Their closest competitors domestically obviously have had their own financial difficulties, which have made it difficult for them to compete. But much like Celtic, they've got a kind of similar financial outlook in that it's very difficult for them to go out and buy ready-made talent in a way that they used to be able to do. It's very much the case that virtually all Belgian clubs now, regardless of their size, they have to develop their own talent and then reinvest in that through the academies, which are very strong generally in Belgium, and young players get good opportunities in Belgium. It's a great league to develop young talent. They definitely will get opportunities because those pathways are there. So yeah, Club are historically the dominant side and certainly have been for pretty much the last decade in Belgium. There's a curious system with the league in Belgium, just in case people aren't aware. I know lots of leagues have playoffs at various stages in the season, like we do in Belgium. After 30 games, the top 6 becomes playoff 1, and that becomes the championship playoff. This is where it gets interesting, because at that stage, the points that the teams have gathered are halved. Why they're halved, we've been debating for years. I personally don't like the system very much. Won't go into why here, but yeah, the points are halved. So, if you're leading the league and you have a 10-point lead, when you get to the playoffs, that only becomes a 5-point lead. So, winning the league in Belgium is a very different thing to how you might win the league in other countries. I'll just give you a really good example of that. Last season, Club Brugge came into these playoffs at the end of the regular season, a massive 19 points behind the then leaders, Union Saint-Gilloise. And because Union, much to everyone's surprise, lost the first 4 games of the playoff, unheard of for them, Club were able to go on and win the title and claw back that massive gap, courtesy of the points being halved and those losses, because they won 9 of those 10 games. So it's really about peaking at the right moment in Belgium. That's really what it's about. They are expected to dominate domestically in Belgium, of course, being the biggest side. Their fans expect them to go out and do the business all the time. They have had a bit of an issue that's been long-standing for a little while. It's reared its head again recently, in that they've been unable to kind of dominate games the way that they would like to. There've been periods in games where they really have kind of fallen out of things in a way that they kind of shouldn't. And interestingly, before the recent international break, club's head coach Nicky Hine did say, well, we might have a bit of an attitude problem in the camp. This isn't, specifically linked to Nicky Hine as coach or what's going on inside the club at the moment. This is really a long-standing issue that arguably goes back about 3 years. Ronny Deila, who Celtic fans will know well, of course, lost his job as head coach at Club Brugge last season just before those playoffs. For that very reason, he wasn't able to kind of get on top of the sort of inconsistency. They were dropping points that they shouldn't and losing games that they shouldn't have, which led to that massive 19-point gap being made up. But they made the change. Ronny Deila was sacked, despite definitely impressing at certain points. It was replaced by Nicky Hine, who's in now. Nicky came in on a temporary basis for the playoffs and won the league. So it was always going to be very difficult for him not to get the job in the end, which he has done. So in terms of expectations domestically, it's similar to what the Celtic fans would expect. They're expected to go out there and win every game. The Belgian league is more competitive than the Scottish league. So realistically, clubs are going to drop more points in a way that perhaps Celtic wouldn't in Scotland. But in terms of pure expectations, they are kind of pretty similar.
Yeah.
In terms of the way that they play, the system is actually very similar to Celtic's at the moment, and that's what makes this game particularly intriguing. It's kind of like for like. There isn't a great deal in difference in their systems. So how the two sides line up from a tactical perspective is going to be really interesting to see next week, because I think that some of the choices that both Brendan Rodgers and Nicky Hine have to make will have a massive bearing on which way this game actually goes, because there's a lot of like for like in terms of positioning and the way that both coaches like to play the game as well.
So a 4-3-3, you would assume, kind of set up from Brugge.
Yeah, it could well be. I mean, interestingly, if you look at Europe, particularly from Brugge's perspective this year, particularly the away games, they've been a little bit more cautious.
Right. Okay.
So they've stuck an extra holding midfielder in there to sit in front of, the back four. Just to provide that extra cover. But, how that kind of midfield diamond works is very much up for grabs, I think. But looking at the way that Nicky Hine set up, especially with the away games, he's been a little bit more cautious, and I think he's likely to do that here. One thing to watch out for from a club perspective is who starts up front. First choice striker Gustav Nielsen's been out injured since September, isn't expected to be fit. So it's going to be between Spanish striker Ferran Jutgla and Romeo Vermaat, who's quite an exciting young Belgian striker who's come through club's academy. I think Jutgla will probably get the nod just on the basis that he's started the Champions League games so far this season ahead of Romeo Vermaat. But that's something to watch out for, because that position's interchangeable a bit.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of players there. One guy I wanted to ask about was Andreas Skov-Olsen, 26 goals last season, I believe it was. How's he been playing this season, and is he someone to watch on Wednesday?
Yeah, I would say he's definitely one of club's key players, and I would expect him to start. Obviously, his compatriot Kasper Schmeichel will know him very well, so all of that intel will already have been passed on without the analysis team having to do too much work on him, probably. He's been slightly less impressive this season than last season, partly because of a couple of little niggling injuries which have disrupted his form a little bit, but he is fit, and I would expect him to start the game. He's missed more games than I think club would have liked so far this season because of some of those disruptive influences. But yeah, he'll be a big player on the night, as will his namesake on the other side, Christoph Solis, another important player for them offensively. That front three for Club Brugge is important in much the same way as Celtic's front three tends to operate as well, tactically set up in a very similar way as well, with an interchangeable role kind of in the hole if necessary as well for somebody. So yeah, I would expect Skov-Olsen to start, and he's definitely a player who can score and provide assists. So he's somebody that I'm sure Celtic are very well aware of.
Hans Vanaken as well, central midfielder, quite tall, very imposing, scored against Aston Villa from the spot. Mr. Champions League, I believe he's called, back in Bruges.
Yes, yeah. Hans is undoubtedly a kind of Club Brugge legend. I suppose from a Celtic fan's perspective, you could compare him a little bit to Callum McGregor. Although he didn't come through the club's academy like Callum did with Celtics, he spent the majority of his career at Club Brugge. I think he's got, let's have a look at my notes. Yeah, over a 9-year spell at the club, 133 goals in 469 games for club. Really big influence in the dressing room. And generally, if he plays well, club will play well. He's a very intelligent footballer, very experienced, has had a number of opportunities to leave the club over the years, come to England, but has chose to stay in Belgium because he's happy there, which is very unusual. In fact, he spent his entire club career in Belgium. So his CV is kind of quite unusual for a player of his quality, and I think he will enjoy coming to Celtic Park in a European night and that environment, which is famous, of course, and hopefully trying to impose himself in the game. He can play as a holding midfielder or slightly further forward if needed, but I think he's more likely to try and emphasise the kind of offensive side of his game here, because club have a couple of quite effective holding midfielders in Rafael Onyedika and the Swiss midfielder Arden Yashari, who can, can sit in a hole or be more offensive if needed. But yeah, Vanaken, a bit like Callum McGregor, it's a bit of a cliche, but he's a bit of a metronome player, I think. Much of the good work kind of comes through him, and he's a big influence on all of the players around him, big communicator in the park.
Yeah, so we've talked about Bruges' strengths, we've talked about players to watch. Any weaknesses Bruges have that Celtic can look to exploit?
Well, I think defensively there are some kind of small kind of question marks. This could be quite a difficult night for Bruges, I think, if they don't try and assert themselves in the game, obviously. I think Celtic are definitely favourites for this tie, not just because they're at home, but I think the environment on a European night goes a long way in a task like this. It's so evenly matched, this game, and in fact, when the draw was made and the fixtures were kind of confirmed, this was one of the ones that obviously excited me very early for a number of reasons, but because of how evenly matched the sides actually are, and I'm sure both clubs looked at this at the same time and saw that as a very, very winnable game. And Celtic are sitting in a reasonably strong position at the moment, knowing that if they win this game, they're in an exceptionally strong position to get out of the league phase. Arguably, the 3 points are slightly more important from a club perspective. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays into this psychologically as well, whether they're willing to really go for it in a game that is winnable from their perspective as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that defence is gettable. I think if you put them under pressure, there are mistakes that can be made there. Some of the defenders have not been particularly impressive this season. There's the young right back, Joaquin Cease, who will probably start. Picked up an injury just before the international break, which I think he's recovered from, so there's a good chance he's going to start. He can be put under pressure purely because he's a young player. He's making a lot of progress. He's playing regularly at this level now, which is good for him. But coming into this environment and putting him under pressure, will be interesting from a Celtic perspective as well. And equally, Maxim de Kuiper, 23-year-old left back, really good, exciting young player, just broke into the international team for Belgium as well. He is good offensively, but occasionally, sometimes his judgment when it comes to tracking back during transitions, he can leave himself a little bit exposed, and that's happened to him a few times at Champions League level this season. So there are opportunities for Celtic there, and I actually think the wing backs for both sides could potentially be quite decisive in this game. Which ones get the better of one another could have a big say in which way this tie goes.
One player I wanted to ask about was Arne Engels. Obviously, came through Bruges with NXT, their sort of B team, I believe. How's he been viewed in Belgium at the minute? Obviously, started the last two games for the national team, and how's he viewed by people within Club Brugge?
Yeah, well, I mean, Arne's always had a really good attitude, as a young player. When he was at kind of Club Next, which is Brugge's development side, they play in the Challenger Pro League, which is the division below the top division in Belgium. So they play at a good level regularly. Arne's always had it in his mind that I think he was probably going to leave kind of quite early. I think he had a sense that he wasn't going to be able to break into the senior Club Brugge side, so made the decision very early that he was going to leave and try and play regular football at a higher level, and that's what he did. He got his big move to the Bundesliga and was playing regularly there before he came to Celtic. So his progress has been pretty remarkable in a way. And it's turned out to be a really good move for him. I think is has surprised quite a lot of people. I think it would be fair to say. I mean, coming into the international squad has been a very big thing for him. Domenico Tedesco has been bringing in a lot of young talent over the last few months to just have a kind of closer look at them. And now that he's playing at a higher level week in, week out at Celtic and able to play what for him will hopefully be 8 Champions League games a season, is obviously going to help his profile and help his game. And actually shown so far, both at Celtic and internationally, that he's kind of continuing that development. He's a bit like Hans Vanaken in that I think he has an offensive side to his game that's underappreciated. Often he's played as a kind of holding midfielder, but his ability to break lines from deep positions, I think, which Celtic fans will already have seen in flashes, is actually kind of quite impressive. That ability to turn a deep lying position, into a goal scope opportunity with one pass is definitely an ability he's got, and that's something he's going to look to develop under a coach like Brendan Rodgers at Celtic. He will know a lot of these players very well. I'm sure he will have been part of some of these tactical discussions as well. He'll also know Nicky Hyen as well, because Club Brugge's coach now has actually been there for a number of years. He's been there for around 4 years now. He was on the coaching staff with Bruges under-19s, and then he was the head coach at Club Next. And Arne was still there at that time, so they will have crossed paths briefly before he got his German move and before Nicky moved up to coach the senior side after Ronnie Dyler got sacked. So yeah, there'll be meetings of quite a lot of friendly faces, I suspect, at this game, and it's always nice when you get those opportunities.
Do you think Engels has somewhat of a point to prove against Bruges then, obviously, because he didn't eventually make it into the senior team, moved away, got the minutes at Augsburg, gets his move to Celtic, and now he's coming up against Bruges?
Well, I think he'll be looking forward to it, and why wouldn't he? I mean, I don't think he was necessarily expecting to kind of come up against Club anytime soon. So I'm sure he was, very excited when he saw this fixture kind of crop up. I know it was when he signed, he was actually asked at his press conference about the fixture, which he tried to play down a little bit, but you could tell by the wry smile when asked about this fixture, which was, weeks ago, in fact, a couple of months back now, that he was already kind of looking forward to it very much. And he wouldn't need any extra motivation, but there's bound to be a little bit of extra motivation in there. And there'll be a lot of eyes on him, I think, in the evening. Not just because you have to perform if you're playing in that Celtic midfield in a big European game like this, but also because he'll be playing against lots of people he knows very well, personally and professionally, and there'll be a lot of pride for him in that, I think, as well. Belgian footballers are kind of quite self-effacing. They're kind of quite modest, I think. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of people in the Club Brugge camp that will be delighted to see Arne again, and happy that he's progressing. At the level he is, they'll just be hoping that he doesn't have as good a night as they will be hoping to have. So that competitive edge is always useful, I think.
Just on Celtic, how are they being perceived in Bruges ahead of this match and in Belgium? Because they've obviously made a decent start. 7 points from 4 games is probably higher than the expectations Celtic fans set out at the beginning of the league phase. So how are they being looked at back in Belgium?
Well, I think they see this as kind of quite a difficult tie, particularly because it's an away fixture. I think the feeling about it would be slightly different if this was a home fixture at the Jan Breidel. There'll be a lot of players in that Club Brugge squad that I think, although they are seasoned professionals with a lot of experience, will probably be surprised by the atmosphere they're about to come into. Many players over the years have spoken about, not quite being prepared for what that was actually like. And we know that these things can go either way. They can either produce the best in players or they can, shell shock people. So I think how they cope with that is going to be a big part of the game as well. I think they will feel that they can win this game, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. It's quite rare at Champions League level now to have games that are so evenly matched, really. I know it's a cliche, but there are no easy games at this level against anybody. You can't take anybody for granted anymore. The gaps between top sides and clubs that would be considered, smaller, are much smaller than they used to be. That gap's been closed all the time. So I think they will have identified this game as being important for them to get something out of, because actually when you look at Club Brugge's remaining fixtures, they have not been kind to them at all. They've got Sporting Lisbon at home after the Celtic game, and then they've got Juventus at home and Manchester City away. So it's been pretty cruel the way the fixtures have been thrown at them here. So I think they know they're going to have to get something out of this game. I don't think they'd be massively disappointed to leave with a draw, to be honest, because that still leaves them kind of in the mix. But again, much like Celtic, 3 points for them would completely change the complexion of the way the rest of the league phase will go for them, particularly looking at those fixtures. Equally, Celtic will know that they're then very close to securing qualification from that league phase with a win as well. And their home form in the tournament this year has actually been quite good. So they're coming into this feeling very good about themselves as well.
Yeah, definitely. Even stretching back to last season, I think it's 4 games at home in the Champions League without defeat for Celtic, 3 wins and a draw. So actually pretty decent. Just finally, before we finish up, Scott, how do you think this game's going to unfold, and can you put your neck on the line for a score prediction?
The old score prediction. Well, as I was saying, I think Celtic are favourites. And I think they will take advantage of this first ever meeting between the two sides, make that home advantage count. I can see Celtic winning this by two goals to 1, or maybe even 3-1. I think if they choose not to take the foot off the pedal, we shall see.
Yeah, we shall see indeed, Scott. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. If you enjoy the content, guys, be sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, all that good stuff. You know the drill. Scott, thanks again.